Live. This is Coffee with Will, brought to you by Northwest Furniture and Mattress, AnythingDigital.com, Grand Ron Hospital, and See Bright Dentistry. And I'm here today with Zeke Fetrow, who is the director of the Grand Ron Symphony and our fearless leader in Brahms Requiem, which we just did our first performance last night, and we have another one coming up tomorrow night, 7:30 p.m. at Mackenzie Theater. And thank you so much for joining me here today, Zeke.
Pleasure to be with you, Will.
So let's talk a little bit about you, first of all. You have a very interesting story about how you came to music. It's kind of an interesting, way you came to music. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I was a really late bloomer to music, actually. I started out a singer, and I would just, I sang all the time. I listened to a CD player, but I never joined a choir, never sang at church or anything like that. Didn't do music in high school until my senior year. I was dating a woman at the time. We'd been dating.
It's always the women.
It's
always the girls.
It is. She talked me into it. Well, more or less talked me into it. She showed up at my weight training class and said, "You're going to audition for choir today." And I said,
So
"Absolutely not. I'm over there doing pull-ups and stuff."
I'm doing weight training right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to do choir. And I was really adamant about not doing it. I was like, choir's verbatim. Choir is for sissy boys. And I was like, now this haunts me. So I was like, I'm absolutely not auditioning for choir. So that day at lunch, I'm auditioning for choir with the choir director, and he's like, "Zeke, you have a tremendous voice. You have a really beautiful voice. You're in choir now." And it was, at that point, I didn't feel like it was really an option. I was like, okay. The next morning at 7 a.m., zero period, I was in this chamber ensemble. They called it troubadours, which is a French term. They used to travel around in little troupes and sing concerts. But they had this chamber ensemble, and I couldn't read music. I had never learned anything musical outside of just singing it back by ear. But I had a good ear, and so I joined the troubadour ensemble. That day, instead of weight training, my class was changed to concert choir. And so in about a 12-hour period, my entire career path changed. I wanted to work in the NBA, play for the NBA. That probably wasn't going to happen. I'm like 5'7" on a good day.
I was going to say, you're not the tallest
I'm not the tallest person.
but,
I definitely use the podium.
You can do whatever you put your heart to, Zeke. You can do whatever you want. You just work hard enough at it.
So I realized,
7 inches.
and grow, another foot or something. I realized that the NBA wasn't going to happen, but I love basketball, still do. And I realized that I really had a passion for making people happy. I wanted to be a politician for a long time. Thought about politics as a career, being a lawyer, and then a judge, maybe the president someday. And I realized that the bane of politics is that a lot of times you end up making half the people happy some of the time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get on board with that. I wanted to be able to make everybody happy. And so I came into music with this kind of mission of making it fun and making people happy through music. So went to college, did my undergrad in Portland at Concordia University. I actually teach there now also, so that's a lot of fun. I see a lot of people like me who come to college wanting to do music as a career who maybe can't even read music yet. When I got there, the choir director was like, "Zeke, you can't read music, but you have a great voice. I can teach you to read music. I can't teach you to be passionate. You've got that."
That sounds very similar to my experience with Brahms, because the day one I came into Brahms, I've never done choir before. I've never read sheet music before. So my girlfriend, I tell you, it's always the ladies. She says, "Do you want to do this thing?" And I, thinking normally I can pick things up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
"Do you want to come do this thing?" "Sure, I'll do this thing." So I walk in day one to the choir rehearsal of Brahms Requiem, and I open it up. And I told this to Mike when he was on this show. It was like a foreign language inside a foreign language. And all I could do was hope that the person that was next to me knew somewhat what they were doing so that I could follow along. But actually something that you said there, I kind of want to go back to. You came to music because you wanted to make people happy.
Yeah.
And that's something that's kind of interesting, because music, music is very much about emotion. We've kind of talked about this in our last interview when we did it a while ago. And so, but music isn't always happy. It explores the myriad of human emotion, and Brahms' Requiem is a perfect example of this. It explores, it explores sadness and mourning and grief, but at the same time, happiness. So how do you come to a place of making people happy in a medium that is not always necessarily about happiness?
Yeah, this is a great question. Delving into emotion in classical music is always kind of a tough topic, because there are so many kind of subtleties and nuances to emotion in music. one of the things that I really love is that we can find a sense of accomplishment and a sense of joy, even when the music isn't joyful. You know, I talk a lot about doing big pieces or doing this piece. I was asked earlier this week, you know, why do this piece? Why this piece? Because it is really challenging.
It is.
And
it's a very
is
challenging piece.
very heavy material. I mean, Brahms was, when he wrote this piece, was going through a really tough time in his life. He was a very emotionally reserved man. You know, he kind of was set in his ways, very, you know, generally disagreeable. But also we find this kind of almost discord with his music, which is extremely emotive. It's almost overly so, almost melodramatic sometimes. So we find this disconnect between the two, Brahms the man and Brahms the music. But what I find in the Brahms Requiem is that we see so much of Brahms' personal struggles in the piece. He was great friends with Robert and Clara Schumann. They were some of the biggest influences on his life. We're talking about the middle of the 19th century. Robert Schumann, is a rock star. He's absolute, you know, he's got international acclaim. He's writing piano music all the time. His wife, Clara, is an internationally known performer. They're both piano player extraordinaires, virtuosos. And Brahms meets this pair, and you know, they get acquainted and they see Brahms and they see him play and they see his music. And Robert Schumann does for Brahms what I wish, you know, every great composer had somebody to do for them, which is he writes to a publisher, a major music publisher, and he says, this guy's the real deal. He says Brahms is the next Mozart, the next Beethoven. He is the next big star.
Wow.
And he's in his, you know, Brahms is late teens, early 20s when this happens.
Wow.
So his career just explodes. He's a household name by the time he's 30.
Wow.
He doesn't write his first symphony until he's 40. But, you know, it's kind of funny because we see again this disconnect between Brahms' music. You know, it's exploding, it's famous. He's a rock star almost, you know, like the likes of Franz Liszt or Schumann. But you see Brahms, the man, really struggling with this idea of having meaningful personal relationships. He never really had one beyond the Schumanns. For many, many years, the Schumanns were his best friends. He traveled all over Europe, Brahms did, and always wrote back to the Schumanns, wrote them letters, sent them flyers. He sent Clara manuscripts of the piano pieces he was writing, dedicating them to her and to her friendship and her patronage and her kind of generosity. And so you get this man who's learning to write music and learning to perform, but at the same time dealing with these kinds of struggles. And then his best friend, Robert Schumann, tries to kill himself.
Oh my gosh, wow.
And Schumann is institutionalized and dies 2 years later, never really recovering. And Brahms had talked with Schumann about writing a requiem, about writing this mass. The requiem is really a mass for the dead.
For the dead, yeah.
So it's not a light topic.
No,
I mean,
not at all.
You're talking about coming into the rehearsal room with, you know, maybe some really heavy baggage. Each person individually comes into it, but Brahms especially, he wrote the piece almost in its entirety after talking with Schumann, and he wanted to call it the People's Requiem. He wanted it to be, you know, something everyone could reach.
Well, and I remember reading a little bit about this because he didn't include a lot of Christian dogma in there, specifically because he wanted it to be more universally human.
Yeah, and one of the really interesting things is Brahms wasn't exceptionally religious. He had great working knowledge of the Bible. He had great working knowledge of Scripture and of Christianity. But the only piece of ecclesiastical literature he ever owned was a children's Bible his mother gave him, which it becomes really important. All of the texts taken and put into the Brahms Requiem are actually little excerpts from his children's Bible.
Wow.
There's, you know, you look at the works by Johann Sebastian Bach, a lot of it is one big chunk of literature or liturgy, and it's set to music. Brahms did exactly the opposite. He picked and pulled each little bit, which has the risk of seeming incoherent, but I think that it shows a lot about Brahms' approach to mortality and to being human. Is every time we get presented with this idea or this emotion that's challenging or provocative or heart-wrenching, he counters it with something that's positive, hopeful, and rejoicing. We see in the second movement.
I was just going to mention the second movement.
I mean, what a powerful statement. You get the choir comes in, denn alles Fleisch es ist wie Gras, which is all flesh will return to grass, and then from the grass sprouts flowers, and those flowers will also fall. And it's this idea that humans are temporary. We're kind of guests.
The impermanence.
Yeah, the impermanence idea. And the first time that the choir sings it, it's very, very soft. It's very dry. It's very thin. It's almost more of a prayer than it is a statement. And then something changes in the orchestra. And in the orchestra, before the choir re-enters, you get this kind of pom, 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 this almost heartbeat, kind of racing heartbeat going. And I feel it most in the timpani, is what I tell people to listen for. Listen for the timpani. He tells you where everything's going to happen. And you get this great crescendo in the orchestra. And then the choir comes back in, repeating the same text, Den alles Fleisch, all flesh has grasped, everything will return to dust. And this time, they're screaming. And it's one of the most powerful moments in the entire piece for me, because I feel that kind of frustration and that, that anger and that denial that people face when they deal with mortality, and they're reminded of their own mortality, or maybe of the loss of a loved one, and they feel helpless. And so I really hear Brahms' kind of personal struggle in that. He wrote all the movements. He wrote 6 movements, added the 5th one later. I'll talk about that in a second. He wrote 6 movements, and Schumann said it should be called a German Requiem. Unfortunately, I disagree with both of them. The reason we call it Brahms Requiem is because it is so personal. It's got, every single note has his footprint on it, has his stamp on it. I don't think that anyone else could have written a piece like this. No one else could have come up with a piece that's so uniquely Brahms.
Well, and it's interesting, and it's kind of funny too, because I have the exact same interpretation of number 2 as you. I have gotten that exact same, the way that the first Den alles Fleisch is very soft, and then you have this crescendo where they say it the second time, but then instantly, like almost afterwards, they sing, but then you begin to, I think it's called a diminuendo, where it goes quieter and quieter, and it really captures how, in a very sad, angry moment, you purge yourself of that thing, and then it
knock the things off the desk.
Exactly, and then it transitions into this sadness and this sort of beautiful, like, tranquility,
this calm after the storm. I mean, absolutely, and I think that's one of the appeals of the piece for me, is it really does explore those emotions without reservation.
Absolutely.
I mean, you get that whole gamut. The piece is, the overall message I take from it is hope. It's a requiem for the living, really. It's helping the living mourn. And so you get this kind of structural parallelism throughout the piece, the first and 7 movements. Selig sind die Toten. Blessed are those who mourn at the beginning of the piece. Blessed are those who are dead. And you get this parallelism between the piece, so it gives it great balance. But I find, for example, in the 3rd movement, when you get the solo baritone voice, and to me this is Brahms himself singing. He comes out and he sings, Herr, lehre doch mich, which is, Lord, teach me. Teach me that I too must have an end. Teach me that I'm only temporary. Teach me that this is part of the cycle, that this is going to happen, and there's nothing I can do, that it's out of my hands. Teach me this. So it's Brahms kind of pleading with, like, why does this happen? Like, can you explain this to me? Like, I'm frustrated. You get the Den alles Fleisch movement where he's just raging, and then teach me how to be better. Teach me how to accept what I can't control.
Absolutely.
And teach me how to move forward with this. And then you get, in the 5th movement, the soprano soloist. The 5th movement was the last movement to be written. Brahms' mother passed away while he was writing the Brahms Requiem. And so, myself included, a lot of critics think that the soprano voice really is Brahms' mother. She was such a huge part of his life. And I think about growing up and looking to my mom for advice and thinking about, like, well, it's my birthday, I want to spend it with my family, my mom is like my best friend, I tell her everything. And Brahms was the same way. He looked to his mom for all sorts of advice. She was kind of one of the only stable points in his life, the Schumanns being the other, and Clara in particular. But his relationship with his mother was so important to him, and she passed away, and the text for the 5th movement is, essentially, now you have sorrow, but know that I want to comfort you. Know that there's comfort coming. And the final text of the movement is, to me, the least the least clouded. It's the most transparent of the entire piece. The soprano soloist, the final words she sings are, "I want to comfort you like a mother comforts her son." And so I find, in that sense, a really relatable sentiment that, after this anger and frustration and kind of pent-up aggression and denial and then kind of sadness, you have this moving forward with acceptance and getting over the grief. And that's, to me, a really uplifting experience.
Yeah, it sounds like this is a very personal piece to you.
It is. I think that one of the things, classical music tends to get a bad rap sometimes.
It does, yes.
It does. And, it tends to be uppity or high society.
Just a bunch of people who have way too much time in their hands and way too much money to spend on instruments, playing things that nobody can understand.
It's stuff that's been written hundreds of years ago.
Yeah,
it's all
yeah.
old dead guys. And I think that classical music and a lot of classical concert goers have kind of earned that reputation by trying to make it, I think, more hoity-toity than it needs to be.
Sure, absolutely.
Or making it less accessible. And so
Yeah.
I think part of my job is to try and make it more accessible.
Absolutely.
And so when I look at a piece like the Brahms Requiem, I'm looking for what moves me about this piece. How can I invite people into that experience? How can I pull people into that experience? I don't want to give them a way out. I want them to, when they sit down in the seats, butts in seats, I want them to be trapped and have to go through that experience because
You're going to emote, damn it!
you are gonna emote because it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's hard to show up and be vulnerable and to be open to that kind of experience.
Absolutely.
That's what I find is one of the barriers to entry is people aren't willing to be vulnerable. And I would urge anybody who's like, I'm not really a classical fan, or I don't really listen to classical music. Number one, there's a lot of reasons not to. I think that there are more reasons to do it than there are not to. But I think the most common myth I dispel is not all classical music is good. It's the same way with pop. It's the same way with jazz. It's the same with any genre. There are great pieces in every genre. I personally grew up listening to hip hop and R&B. You wouldn't know it. But I absolutely loved some of the hip hop artists, grew up listening to them, the R&B on CD and stuff. I had mixtapes and all sorts of things. But not all hip hop is good. Not all classical music is good. There are really some spectacular gems in the repertoire, and I think that those are worth the discovery. I think that what you get out of doing those and out of learning about those pieces is worth the time it takes to get that discovery. So when I meet people who are like, maybe I'll give classical a shot, I'm like, understand the language. Know the language that people are singing in, if they're singing, or understand kind of the context of the piece, because I think that gives it so much more meaning.
I was actually going to ask you about that. The context of the piece seems to really inform your interpretation of it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that knowing that Brahms went through what he went through tells me a lot about what each movement is about and what the words are about. We're doing German. It's a tough language to learn for English speakers. It's still a Romance language, but it's not as intuitive as maybe Latin or Italian would be, or even Spanish would be. The grammatical structure is a little kind of wonky compared to English, and sometimes that can really turn people away, is doing in a language that they don't know. But like we did on Tuesday, we're providing an English translation for the entire piece, and I think that invites people in to share the experience. I think that just knowing that much about the piece, knowing what the words mean, is a huge step. Knowing the context for the time period and knowing what it meant to him and what it meant to Clara and what it meant to his mother and what it meant to Robert, I think gives a whole nother level of depth to the work, and you learn to appreciate kind of the smaller moments in the piece. People are always like, what's your favorite part? I love to ask people that question too, because I think it's a challenging question.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good parts. There's a lot of really tough parts. But I have probably 4 or 5 favorite moments, and I don't think they're the moments people would suspect. There's one line where in the 4th movement, to me, the structural and emotional peak of the piece, it's the only movement that doesn't mention death. It talks about how lovely is thy dwelling place. It's kind of the reprieve from the entire weight of mortality. I find some of the best lines in the bass singers of all players. It should be sopranos. Of course it should be sopranos. But I find some of the best lines in the basses in the 4th movement, and just some of the harmonies in there. even when the choir isn't singing, just absolutely heart-wrenching.
Absolutely.
And in a great way. I think it makes me feel something. It moves me. It reminds me of, what a joy and how fun it is to be human. Kind of live this experience, the roller coaster of being a person and kind of going through life and experiencing the ups and the downs and navigating that road between.
The roller coaster of being human. You're going to write a book someday on Brahms Requiem.
The roller coaster of being human.
And it's going to be called The Roller Coaster of Being Human. And on that note, I think we're probably going to have to call it because I think we're pretty close to out of time. But thank you so much for coming in and chatting with me.
Absolutely.
It was extremely informative and profound. And I think that we're looking forward to tomorrow night. Really quick before we go,
yes.
What's happening? Maybe you tell the camera what's going on tomorrow night that they should be.
Awesome. So tomorrow night, 7:30, Mackenzie Theater at Eastern Oregon University. We're going to do the Brahms Requiem once again. Tuesday's show was fantastic. You would be remiss to miss it.
Absolutely. Is there a cost?
There is a cost. I think it's $12 for adults, $5 for kids and seniors, $2 for college students with ID.
Very good. Awesome. Well, thank you, Zeke, and thank you, LeGrand Alive, for tuning in. This has been Coffee with Will, brought to you by Northwest Furniture and Mattress, Grand Ron Hospital, anythingtodigital.com, and See Bright Dentistry. Please like and share this video and tune in to legrandalive.tv for more local content.